Okay, Ben from design3 here, talking to Matt Rix, creator of Trainyard. Thanks for doing this interview with us.
No problem.
So, first question: what were like the first video games you played, and what are some of your favorite all-time games?
That's a tough question, but I think one of my all-time favorite games is actually Commander Keen, like an old PC platforming game. I probably played that game more than any other game I played. And then StarCraft. I'm a huge StarCraft fan. So if I was to pick probably like two games that were kind of like the most formative for me, those would probably be the two games. Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. And how did you get first started in video game development?
I did a little bit in high school. I would kind of make cheesy little games and things like that. But I didn't really get into proper game development until very recently when I built Trainyard. So it wasn't until probably the past year that I actually started doing video game development and actually plan to like release games publicly for people to play. So it was only very recently. Yeah.
Cool. And so can you tell us what the current project you're working on is?
Yeah, I'm working on, for Trainyard right now, I'm working on an update so that people can create their own puzzles for the game. So that's kind of a big thing I'm working on for the next month or so. And then after that, I've got some plans for a couple other games. One is a puzzle game similar to Trainyard, and another one is almost an action game. It's like a mix of Tony Hawk and Trials and Cannibal. It's all kind of mixed together. So it's a very different game, but I'm excited to work on it because I'm kind of sick of working on Trainyard now after working on it for so long.
Cool. So what is like a typical day of game development work like for you?
Well, it's funny because right now I'm working from home, so it's not as structured as I'd probably like it to be, but it basically just involves me getting up, working at the computer for a few hours, taking a break, and then working some more. But I find I sometimes have problems keeping focus, so I actually use a technique where you work for 48 minutes and then take a 12-minute break, and then work for 48 minutes and take a 12-minute break and things like that, just to kind of I don't know, keep myself focused and to get the breaks in there. And I find it actually helps. I actually get more work done doing that than I would if I just worked solidly the whole time.
So how do you, when you're starting a game, how do you kind of begin that process of planning and designing it?
I think a lot of it is really on paper. So I have a whole bunch of notepads that are just filled with doodles and sketches and ideas for games. And usually it'll just be, plans on paper, and then if something kind of makes sense on paper, it's almost like I play it in my head and see if it would be fun, and then I do tons and tons of prototypes, usually in Flash, because that's just where my background was, so I do a ton of Flash prototypes, and from there, if they're fun there, then I'll eventually move to actually kind of developing them for real.
How do you go about playtesting your game?
I probably don't do as much playtesting as I should, but started off mostly by myself, just trying it out, give it to my wife, and she tries it out, and things like that. And then I also do a little bit of beta testing. So with Trainyard, I probably had like 30 or 40 beta testers that I sent it out to, and I actually learned a lot from that and got some good feedback. But that's really about it. That's the sort of thing in the future where I'd like to actually do more and more phases of playtesting and beta testing.
How did you find your beta testers that you used for that?
I actually found them on, there's kind of a forum called Touch Arcade. It's like a site and everything, and I found a lot of users there. I just posted a thread, new puzzle game coming out, I'd like some people to beta test it. And you tend to get, I got a huge response of people, but of those people, a lot of them just want a free game. And so you really have to, you find the cream of the crop, and now I've got this list of a few beta testers that I know will give me really solid feedback next time around. So it's just a process like that, where not everyone works, but some of them do.
Okay, so Trainyard was built for mobile devices such as the iPhone. Can you kind of talk about the process of developing a game for a mobile device?
Well, it's actually funny that I started out actually developing it in Flash, and it wasn't going to be an iPhone game at the very beginning. And then once I'd kind of played it a couple times, I realized this would make a much better iPhone game than a Flash game. And so I went through the whole process of redesigning the UI to specifically fit on the iPhone, and that kind of determined a lot of my choices for how big the grid was and how big the buttons were, and a whole bunch of things kind of came about because of the fact that I was developing specifically for the iPhone. So, I mean, that was the general.
Cool. So each level in Trainyard is a complex puzzle. Can you talk about the process of designing and building each of these puzzle levels?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Some people people ask me if I have some sort of program that can solve it or something like that. There's nothing like that. So every puzzle in Trainyard involves me actually solving each puzzle. And the way I do it is usually for a given puzzle, I'll kind of have some sort of technique or something that I want the user to learn, some sort of specific objective that I want to kind of accomplish with that puzzle, and then I kind of work from there. So in one it might be teaching them a certain technique. In another one I might take a certain term and say, like, a volcano. What would a volcano look like as a puzzle? And then there's actually a puzzle called Volcano that looks kind of like a volcano. So there's an interesting process there where there's a whole bunch of ways of doing it, and then once I actually create it, I have to go in and solve it and try and figure out if it's even possible, and sometimes they aren't, and then I just scrap those levels as impossible puzzles and kind of move on. So that's the general process of it, yeah.
That's interesting. So what advice would you give to people who want to get started in game development themselves?
The key thing to do, I think, is to, I mean, it seems obvious, but is to actually do it. And I think a lot of people start a little bit and then give up. I think if you put an hour a day into it, you will eventually accomplish something very worthwhile. The problem happens when you just don't do stuff. As long as you're doing something, it'll eventually pay off. I think that's the biggest thing by far. Yeah.
And that brings me to our last question, which is a little bit more on the fun side. If you had to sum up video game design and development in just one word, what would that word be?
I think the word would be creativity.
Awesome.
All right, thanks.
All right, thanks a lot, Matt.
No problem.